coaches, like if you're a young coach and you're really struggling to get the foot in the door, like I think on numerous levels, working in a high school is great because you've got to develop pedagogy, like you've got to be able to develop an ability to convey information to people. You don't want to have all this jargon, which is massive too when it comes to talking with coaches, with head coaches and assistant coaches. Like they don't need to know like progressive overload and like a realization period or whatever the terminology might be. But you need to be able to explain to them or get on the same page as them. Like, hey, this is where athlete A, B, and C are at, and this is where we need to get them to, and this is how I'm going to do it.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Working in Sport podcast. My name is James Grigson, and today we've got a good one. Jared Hoare. Jared Hoare is a former rugby league player for the Central Coast Comets, now, of course, the Central Coast Capras. He was a teacher up in North Queensland, moved over to Florida for nearly 5 years, Florida Atlantic University, where he did some time lecturing, but also S&C in their collegiate program, mainly with individual athletes. And then over the last 5-6 years back here in Australia with the North Queensland Cowboys and the South Sydney Rabbitohs in there as a strength and conditioning coach across pathways and also with the first team men's. I hope you really enjoy this episode. There's a lot to take away from about the young coach's ego coming out of university and thinking they know everything. That was a really good one, and I myself had some flashbacks to my thought processes straight out of university. Some really good lessons in there about always adding strings to your bow and how you can improve as a coach and just understanding the overall picture of the club. What truly is your role in the club? How are you going to help the athletes, the group develop and go on to ultimately serve the club rather than just thinking about your own individual needs? I really enjoyed this chat with Jared, and I hope you do too. Before we jump onto the chat, this Working in Sport podcast is presented by JTG Media. They are a sales and marketing consultancy agency. JTG Media helps businesses, mainly service businesses, with their sales and marketing efforts to either increase their digital presence online or to increase their digital presence online and get new sales, get new members, get more people through the door at your business. That's JTG Media, sales and marketing consultancy agency, jtgmedia.org. All right, let's get on with the show. The main thing that jumped out at me is just the diversity in your career span to date so far. Like, obviously still a young bloke, still got a fair bit of legs on you, but like to go from player with the Comets, now the Capras, and then into teaching, and then obviously a stint over in Florida, and then back into rugby league, going down to Sydney. I'm like, wow, like I want to speak to this guy, and because I think you have a unique story. Obviously, the purpose of what we're trying to do here is take people's stories and kind of create like a pathway almost based off of those stories, because there's not really step one in sports science to a certain degree, and everyone's is different. So, mate, obviously you're a player, and then you went into teaching, and then what was the step for you to go, actually, no, I don't think I want to be a teacher anymore. I want to get into the world of sport and be in the conditioning world.
Yeah, I think probably like I was always like I was a very mediocre player. Like I only got like I was a fringe state league player at best. So like to even get that far, I think a lot of it was just through like working hard and training and stuff like that. So I always had definitely had like an interest in training and what can I do that might set me apart training wise from someone else. And so even like when I started my undergrad, like the end goal, the end game was always kind of to get into strength and conditioning, athletic performance. And then obviously, like you said, like there's no sports science or exercise science factory when you finish your degree where you can just go straight into that kind of thing. So I thought the most logical step was probably to go back to uni for 12 months, and I think it's 2 years now, but 12 months I did my graduate diploma in education and got into high school for a bit, teaching there. And that was, to be completely honest, it was probably just a means to an end, to get into, to save up some money to go and do my master's degree. So when I kind of always have been enamored a bit with American sport and stuff like that, I guess. And I think at that time, like as probably even getting bigger now over here with just with social media and stuff, it's so much more accessible. But even back in what was that, like 2011 when I first started teaching, like I'd kind of always had in the back of my head, like I wanted to go over to the States and study. A big part of that was because I knew that if I went to a Division 1 school and was able to study, like I'd be able to intern and
Mm.
kind of work in the athletic department there. So that was kind of the beginning of the journey, I guess. Like I wanted to be able to go over there, and I did a lot of research around like, which school I wanted to go to and things like that. So yeah, I guess like I suppose with most people who get into our kind of area, like you've always got to have some kind of passion for sport there. And like just for me, it was a bit of a personal thing where I was like, oh, well, I know I'm not as good as these players around me, so what can I do that sets me apart? And it just kind of planted the seed and started the journey for me, I guess, in working in strength and conditioning.
Mate, that's the thing that binds, like the love of sport is the thing that binds us all. Like I never got to put on, study sports science, but never got to put on the jersey or the polo to work in a club. But I know when I'm
Yeah,
talking to yourself or I'm talking to whoever, or even talking to people that don't work in sport, it's like that love of sport is what binds us. So I think
yeah,
myself and other people that I've spoken to, that's a guiding principle. Like, why did I want to get into it? Obviously, it was for the love of sport. The time over in Florida, you're at Florida Atlantic Uni. You were 4 years
yeah.
over in Florida, 3 years or majority of that time working in S&C in the athletic department. What's the main, like for people that haven't been over to the States or people that are pondering a mid-career move, or maybe they're pondering a similar thing to you, they want to go study over there. What are some of the differences that you see in the athletic programs in the States, or particularly at the Florida uni there, and then what you see here in Australian sport?
It's probably I think the landscape over there is starting to change a little bit, but definitely what I found when I first got over there, it was very siloed. So like this is strength and conditioning and this is the sport, and there was a bit of not a disconnect, but it wasn't didn't have that kind of I suppose now you look at like most clubs will have like a high performance manager, and you talk about technical periodization and all that kind of stuff where your skill and your conditioning or your speed or whatever, it all kind of blends together. Whereas over there, I found it was a little bit more siloed, which was kind of it's kind of everyone likes to think that they know it all, and I was probably at that stage of my career where I was still pretty young and had all these grand ideas and thought I was killing it. But then at the end of the day, like the sport is the main thing. So I think, and I think just from what I've seen, people I've talked to, I think there's definitely been a bit of a cultural shift as far as that goes over there.
Yeah.
Um, but it definitely was like when I first started, it was like this is the times they practice, this is the times they're going to be in the gym. Um, and then if the coach needed extra conditioning, they'd just say like, hey, can you do an extra conditioning session here? But there was never like the sports I worked with, and again, it was as a young coach, was probably something I wish I'd got better at. Um, but it was definitely like I'd never like really sat down with the coach and said to them, what do you what is a gold standard beach volleyball player look like to you, or a gold standard tennis player look like to you? And then from there, like working in a bit more collaboration, I guess. Whereas obviously coming back home, working at the Cowboys and at the Rabbitohs, there was definitely a bit more. And again, it's another level. It's a definitely a step up professionalism wise. So there was definitely a lot more, not just collaboration, but just a bit more of like this is our philosophy and this is how we want to play football. So um, I think both clubs I've worked with, they probably take a lot of pride in. They probably have reputations being really flair and attacking and all these kind of things teams, but they take a lot more pride in their toughness and their resilience. So a lot of our training in the gym would be centered around like, okay, what makes like a tough player? And it wasn't doing like dumb stuff or anything like that. It's like, okay, we want to be strong defensively. What are things we need to do in the gym to be good defensively? So what's our core strength like? We're doing like heavy carries and things like that. Whereas when I was in the States, it was probably a lot more. I'd have an idea in my head of like, this is things I think tennis players need, so this is things we'll do in the gym. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And so you mentioned, I guess, like the integrated philosophy and almost and how younger coaches, the first 5, 10 years, you think that your shit doesn't stink, and you may not know what
Mm.
you don't know. What was there?
Yeah.
Was there a learning moment for you? Like, when was there something that stood out to you where you're like, oh, I really need to start having these conversations with coaches for more integrated philosophies? Or was there another moment, like when you were sort of in that first 5 years where you thought you were pretty good, where you got humbled a little bit? Anything that you can share from that perspective?
Probably, yeah, probably when I came back to Australia in my first year at the Cowboys, and I was, I got the elite pathways, head of elite pathways performance there, whatever you want to call it. And in that first season there, was the last year of the national under 20s comp. So probably there's times during that season where it was a lot more, like I said, like you get away from that, like strength trainings here, practices here. It was a lot more integrated. And there's definitely times during early in that season where I was like had like a light bulb moment, I guess, where I was like, oh, well, I really need to earlier in the week. I need to be doing more of this because we have these gaps in our GPS metrics or whatever it might be. And the physio I worked with, Glenn Day, he was really good, and he kind of said some similar things like, we need to make sure we're ticking these boxes, like, so we're a bit more resilient on the weekends. Not that we didn't have any major soft tissues or anything like that, which is probably lucky, to be honest, early in that season. In my reflection of me, but like I said, like just having um, that moment of like, oh shit, like I need to be a bit more around exactly what we're doing on this field. Whereas when I was in the States, and it would be like the tennis guys, they'd train and then come in for a lift. Like I wouldn't go out to practice. Like I wasn't expected to be at practice. But like I said, I think that was, and I was also like more, I was also lecturing full time, so that was probably taken up a lot more of that time where I probably could have gone out and watched a few sessions and seen a few things. But it's just one of those things where, yeah, I came back and you'd have a team and you'd have like a 6 day turnaround, and you're like, shit, so what do I need to make sure we're getting on uh DD +2, so when we get to game day, or we've got to travel, we're going to be okay to go on Sunday afternoon, kind of thing.
I'm going to get to your 5+ years back in Oz with the Cowboys and Souths, but
Yeah,
obviously you were a teacher and then you did some like lecturing at the universities. And you
yeah.
mentioned teaching as almost a means to the end for you to, find your passion and work in sport, which is your true passion. But is there a longer play there with teaching as well? Do you see that as a way, as something to take once you maybe done working in sport to be able to transition back into, whether it's lecturing or
Oh,
that teaching?
100%. Absolutely. Like I really enjoyed. Like high school teaching is fun. And it's one of those things like I definitely go back to it. And I think a lot of young coaches, like if you're a young coach and you're really struggling to get the foot in the door, like I think on numerous levels, working in a high school is great because you've got to develop pedagogy. Like you've got to be able to develop an ability to convey information to people. And you might have a group of 30 students or a group of 30 athletes. You can't just say, like, oh, this is when you bench press, make sure you're locking in your scaps and you're trying to bend the bar. Like you need to understand that there might be 30 different learning styles in there. So you need to develop your skill set to be able to make sure everyone's on the same page. So I think there's a huge for young coaches. I think there's a huge crossover there.
Mm.
And then like obviously like lecturing was so much fun. Like I really enjoyed it. Just being able to the next best thing to actually getting in there and coaching and doing it is talking about it. So I got to and it probably helped me as well because I was able to, again, like you not necessarily talking to athletes, but to talking to prospective coaches and stuff like that, like helping them to understand the nuances of programming and periodization. And then I think it's one of those things like if you're able to explain it to a 5-year-old kind of thing, like
Yeah.
um, you don't want to have all this jargon, which is massive too when it comes to talking with coaches, with head coaches and assistant coaches. Like they don't need to know like progressive overload and like a realization period or whatever the terminology might be, but you need to be able to explain to them or get on the same page as them, like, hey, this is where athlete A, B, and C are at, and this is where we need to get them to, and this is how I'm going to do it. Um, so yeah, I think like teaching and coaching, there's a lot of crossover there. Like you've got to be a great communicator. You've got to be able to kind of be in charge of a room, and same as a classroom. Like a gym can be exactly the same. Like you might have 25 guys there, but there's times like you think like in pre-season that they might have had two sessions already. They might have had a hard skill session and a hard like contact session on the mats, and then you've got to try and get these guys going for a heavy lift in the afternoon. Like it's another one of those things where it's not just about the X's and O's and programming periodization. It's those soft skills and being able to communicate with people and develop relationships. So yeah, there's a huge crossover there, and it's absolutely something I'd go back and do. Like especially lecturing at university, I found really fun because you still kind of can sink your teeth into some of the strength conditioning stuff.
And so what you've now been back in Australia for about 5.5 years and spent some time across North Queensland Cowboys and then South Sydney. I'm curious about the difference in the programs, not so much between the clubs, but I know that you spent some time with Pathways and then also with senior teams. And I think
Yeah.
historically speaking, there would be some people that think that at the A grade men's level or the top team men's level, you're going to get the best of the best, or you're going to get the best experiences, whether it's resources or whether it's players or et cetera, et cetera. But we know the last 5-10 years, depending on the program, whether it's academies in football in Europe or academies down here, or whether it's the female program now bolstering, there is really there is a lot of similarities in what the programs can offer for coaches, but there still are some differences. And what I want to know from your perspective is, from a coach who is looking at weighing up opportunities between a pathways program and a first team program or a women's program, the different challenges that come with those different programs, and what you learned from working with elite pathways that then you could then take into the first team, or what you knew from working with first teams that you can then take back to elite pathways.
I think like in that elite pathway setting, obviously probably the biggest challenge is working in an NRL club. Like you're obviously the first team is going to get the rub of the green, I guess, which is just part of the course. So I think one of the hard things I found working in the elite pathway setting is just like the hours are um, a bit more left field. So you might have like morning sessions and evening sessions, like in the middle of the day. Like you don't you're obviously not going to be in contact with the athletes so much. So it's things like that. Obviously, at the elite pathways level as well, you're dealing with probably a broader range of athletes as far as the haves and the have-nots, which is it's just part of the course. It's just the way it goes, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because I found working in elite pathways, and you have some guys who are you just know they're destined to be 100 first grade games. They're going to play NRL. They're going to play State of Origin. Like there's just guys there that you know that are going to succeed. So I think you still have to, as the elite pathways S&C coach, like you have to, I suppose, understand like your job is for those guys, for those top end guys, is just make sure they can get through their 2 or 3 years in pathways and they understand like um, all the movement patterns, all the kind of requirements, things that they'll need to do to become first graders. And then for those lesser players, like you just want to make sure. I suppose the thing, and I talked to like football managers and stuff like that about it, and they kind of said, look, if you have a 30-man squad of elite pathways, and this is a bit of hyperbole, but basically, if you have a 30-man squad of elite pathways, you might have five of those guys who will kick on, and you might have one or two of them who become like your 200 or 100 gamers, whatever, like the really, really good players. And then if you can get three or four guys who are like 20 to 70 gamers, like you're doing the club a massive favour because it's saving them a bit of money. Um, it's a good kind of promotional tool for them as well. Like I think that was one thing like the Cowboys obviously prided themselves on was they developed a lot of homegrown talent. So um, I think the thing when I was working in elite pathways as well, you just have to understand that you're not necessarily the be all and end all. So there was a lot of times there where you'd probably get too wrapped up in like, oh, I'm going to do like accommodating resistance and we're going to squat with bands and chains and do all kinds of cool stuff. Um, which I was 100% did that. But then I think there was a part of me that was like, oh, well, I don't need to do that. I just need to make sure like when these guys move on to first grade, like if they get a first grade contract, they don't need to be have all these advanced training methodologies under their belt. They just need to know if I can. I know, and I would have chats with the performance staff, the NRL performance staff, so head of performance, head strength coach, everything. If they can hinge, if they can squat, if they can press, if they can have some kind of Olympic derivative that they're half decent at, that they might need to like, polish the edges off, and I can hand them over to the NRL staff. That's doing them a massive favour and a massive, I suppose, doing the player a massive favour as well. Because if you're one of those guys who's not necessarily the blue chip guy, but you're good enough to make it to that next level, like if I can just have those. I think, and again, for young coaches, I think it's really important. Like we all went to uni and we all hear about these cool like training methodologies. We're much better off like for those young guys, like just make sure they can move well. We don't need to like squeeze the juice out of them now because eventually they'll get to that next level and um, they'll have nowhere to go. Like they've already tried all these advanced methods, so we've kind of we're starting to wring the athleticism out of them earlier than needs to be, I guess. So if we can stick to like the basics, if they can squat like that squat, hinge, push, pull, and an Olympic movement, if they can do those five things consistently good for a long time, eventually they'll get to a point where it's like, hey, we're not getting the adaptations we need out of these movements. And then the NRL coach, the senior strength coach can go, okay, like this is the next iteration. It might be like, okay, we need to do some squats with bands or chains or some kind of like special strength kind of movement that's going to help elicit the adaptations we're after. So I think, yeah, that was probably the biggest um, lesson and the biggest thing I think young coaches need to keep in mind if you're working with those elite pathways kids is they don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to do the simple things well and do them consistently.
What I like about yourself is you seem like you're constantly adding different strings to your bow from teaching, lecturing, strength and conditioning, and then now you mentioned that you mentioned me off air that you started a certificate in data analytics. What was the thought process behind starting that certificate, Jared?
I think there's obviously a big push for data, not just in sport, but you look at like outside of sport, the like data kind of plays a huge role in every kind of industry now. And I thought it was probably something that's going to help set me apart a bit as a coach. Because everyone's like, we've done physical performance testing, and whether it's a jump test or beep test or yo-yo, whatever the test is, like everyone's rated data. I think for me, I was like, well, I can see all this stuff out there. Like, how do I actually action it? Like, what's something how can I make better use of this data? And I think for me to do like the analytics degree or grad cert is just a way to, I suppose, uh, just improve how I as a coach can like, process it, analyze it, and then even better present it. Because, like I said, it's all well and good if you've got the data there, and I think we're all a bit guilty sometimes of like everyone wants to just keep everything to themselves and like, this is my IP or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
which is you have at it if that's how you want to go about it like that. But I think there's much more value, and again, is not just as a like as a coach, but like to prove your worth or to save your job or whatever it might be. Like it might be like, hey, like these are the things I've done. This is where player A was at. This is where I got him to, and this is what the data shows. So despite what the results on the field or whatever suggests, like we've done what I've done, what I can do from a physical performance standpoint. And then I think that's the beauty of working in this industry in this day and age. Like you've got like velocity-based data, GPS data, like force decks, like you valve like Nordics and groin bars and stuff like that, where there's so much stuff out there and all of you um, like monitoring stuff. There's so many data points and touch points out there. And I think some places, I think, and some people are really good at starting to dissect that and use it well. But I think there's still like a gap there where we can really push the boundaries a bit more with it. And that was probably for me, that was a big motivating factor upon going back to uni and studying.
As I said, mate, I really respect the fact that you're constantly willing to add strings to your bow and continue to learn. What would be one thing that you would say to someone starting out working in sport?
Yeah, look, if you're suppose like a graduate or looking to graduate, I think the two biggest things I would say is like you just have to be willing to cut your teeth. Everyone kind of, and like everyone, I was guilty of it. Like everyone's guilty of it. You come out of your bachelor's degree and you think like there's a fit like oh this AFL or NRL club is well they're advertising their head of strength and conditioning. Like I could do that, and then you actually once you get it in the coal face, and that was probably the one thing I found. Like I know when like at Florida Atlantic when I was studying, like, and I was doing my master's degree at that point, so I had a decent level of understanding and theory behind me. But then you actually get to the coal face, and you don't even know what you don't know. Like there was so much, um, like just difference in what how coaches approach things, and you've obviously got to pay a bit more attention to, and even at that collegiate level, like they aren't unfortunately they're not full-time athletes. Like they've got a class schedule and a study schedule and all these other things that are factors you've got to work around. So there's all these uh, all the stuff you don't learn or don't know plays a big role in coaching. I think you go to uni and you get the theoretical background, but until you've actually spent some time, like I said, interning and cutting your teeth for a little bit, you don't really understand I suppose, the nuance and the innovation that has to come along with being a coach. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is just be willing to bide your time if you're a young coach, and that there's no job that's beneath you as an S&C kind of intern or young volunteer coach, whatever it might be. Like there's plenty of time to grow and get a full-time job. But in those like formative years, yeah, just be willing to learn. And I think the other thing is don't be afraid to reach out to people. Obviously, do it with a bit of uh, like a bit of respect and have some nuance or some understanding that some coaches might not get back to you, but just don't be afraid to put yourself out there, because that's one thing I've probably tried really hard as someone who's been around a little bit longer now, like in my 30s and stuff. And if someone, a young coach wants to chat or catch up or send me a message, like I try my best to make sure I'm helping them out. Because I know when I was in their boots, like it was really hard if you don't have a network or you don't know people in the industry.
I really appreciate the time. One of the big takeaways that I have from yourself, obviously, is strings to your bow, but also I think that message from that first 5 years of coaching where you kind of got humbled a little bit. You sat back and you went, "Oh, this isn't just about the lifts and the academic, and
Yeah,
this is like a holistic. This is about the club or the program. Like you're looking,
yeah,
like you mentioned, talking to the coach and be like, okay, what do you want the players to be like? How can I assist you with their style of play? Or when you're speaking about the pathways and your role and responsibility working the pathways at the Cowboys or wherever club it is, it's like my responsibility is to the club now to make sure that I'm giving players, I'm saving them, I'm getting them return on investment. I'm either pushing their blue chips
yeah.
to the moon, or I'm making sure that some of the not so blue chips can play at least 20 games. Like, I really appreciate those nuances. 'Cause, yeah, like you don't get it that at uni. You come out at uni and you're like, oh yeah, I can
No,
take on the world. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And you come out of uni, you think like, oh, my job is to like, I'll just get them stronger, and then I'm killing it. But like we said, there's um, so many little intricacies and things you don't think of that go beyond just being a strength coach. But I think, especially again, working at that like elite pathways level, like it's a very rewarding experience. Like for me, like to see guys like Ruben and Tim Gilbert and Hamiso and Murray Taulagi, like all those kind of guys, I'd seen it, and there's plenty of others, but those four, obviously, they've had a lot of success in the Queensland team recently. Seeing those guys, like knowing where they came from and knowing how hard they worked to get there, and knowing that you just played that, and Jeremiah Nanai, like knowing guys like him since they were 15, 16, and you understand, like it doesn't matter if it was me or someone else, like Jeremiah Nanai was always likely to get to that level. Like he's probably one of the biggest athletic freaks of nature I've ever met in my life. But just knowing that you had that like tiny little like sprinkle of magic dust on there to help him along, or just had that little role to play is such a gratifying feeling. And I think like again, like it's probably not something you really think about when you're at university. You think about like, oh, if this guy can squat twice his body weight, like I'm braining it, I'm so good at my job. But for me, like you realise pretty soon, like no one really gives a shit about that. It's more about like helping those guys achieve their goals. It's not about me achieving my goals, I guess.
Jared, absolute legend. Thank you for coming on and sharing that journey, obviously throughout all those all those experiences. Yeah, and there's plenty more to come too. So best of luck in the future. Great to chat. For those that are watching that want to watch more, there's another video up here. If you want to subscribe, you can click down here. For Jared, I'm James. Have a great day.